when an HOA president tried to sell a rancher's private lake as community property. She thought she could bully him into submission, but her obsession backfired because, instead of losing his lake, the rancher bought the very road into her subdivision, installed a gate, and turned her empire of control into the downfall that would strip her of power, pride, and even her home. The lake they didn't own out in the rolling countryside sat a ranch that had been in Jacob Miller's family for generations. The property wasn't just land, it was heritage, spanning open pastures, shaded groves, and at its heart, a wide shimmering lake. That lake was the pride of the ranch, a natural landmark Jacob had spent his childhood fishing in, swimming in, and caring for as part of the land he now called his own. For Jacob, life on the ranch was peaceful. He didn't live under the tight constraints of suburban neighborhoods or manicured subdivisions. His land was his own. His decisions were his own, and the lake was a place of quiet reflection. That peace, however, ended the moment the neighboring subdivision's HOA began sniffing around his property. The subdivision, Clearwater Estates, had sprung up just across the property line, a collection of pristine two-story homes and cookie-cutter lawns. It was governed by an HOA president named Karen Whitfield, a woman who had built her identity on control. For years, she'd ruled over her neighborhood with fines, rules, and a constant obsession with appearances. Her reach had always stopped at the edge of the subdivision, until she noticed Jacob's lake. The lake's edge happened to brush near the subdivision's border. Residents would walk the path that skirted Jacob's land and gaze longingly at the sparkling water, lamenting that they had no access to it. Karen saw an opportunity not for partnership, but for power. In her mind, the lake looked like a community feature, and she began convincing residents it should be theirs. It started with whispers at HOA meetings, promises that she would find a way to secure access. Then came newsletters with carefully worded hints about expanding community amenities. But the moment Jacob discovered what she had done came as a shock. One afternoon, while running errands in town, a neighbor sent him a flyer that left him speechless. On glossy paper, stamped with the Clearwater Estates HOA seal, was a notice that the community lake property was being listed for potential sale. Beneath it, images of his own ranch lake shimmered as though it already belonged to them. They hadn't asked, they hadn't consulted. They simply announced it, claiming something that wasn't theirs to claim. Jacob's disbelief quickly turned to anger. That lake was his, and only his. Yet now, through sheer audacity, Karen was dangling it in front of buyers as though she could cash it in for profit. Worse, her plan wasn't just talk. A realtor, under her instruction, had begun listing the so-called lake lot online. The betrayal hit deeper than just arrogance. To Jacob, it was theft, and attempt to sell off the very heart of his land. And when he confronted the matter, Karen doubled down. She dismissed his protests, insisted he was confused about the boundaries, and waved HOA paperwork in his face as though it gave her dominion over land the HOA had never touched. But Karen didn't stop there. When Jacob publicly corrected her claims, when he told neighbors the truth that the lake was private, not community-owned, she retaliated in a way only a Karen could. She called the cops. On a quiet morning, as Jacob went about his chores, SQUAD cars rolled up to his property line. Karen had told them he was illegally selling HOA property, flipping the story completely on its head. To the officers' credit, they quickly realized the paperwork was nonsense and the accusations baseless. The lake was firmly recorded in Jacob's deed, a fact confirmed by the county assessor. But the damage was done. The HOA had escalated the fight into a public battle. Word spread quickly. Some residents, embarrassed by Karen's antics, apologized quietly. Others, convinced by her lies, muttered about Jacob being selfish for keeping the lake private. And Karen, unshaken, told anyone who would listen that she would win eventually, that no man should be allowed to hoard such a community treasure. But Jacob wasn't a man to be pushed. He didn't like drama. But he also wasn't about to let his family's ranch be trampled by an HOA president with delusions of grandeur. And as he studied the maps, deeds, and property lines, a plan began to form. Karen had made one critical mistake. She was so obsessed with taking what wasn't hers that she overlooked what she already owned. Her own lot, right at the edge of the subdivision, was up for quiet sale after financial troubles in her family. It was small, unremarkable, but positioned at the narrow strip that connected the subdivision's road to the county highway. In other words, the only access point. In or out, the more Jacob looked at it, the more the plan made sense. If Karen wanted to claim what wasn't hers, he would show her what it meant to lose what she thought she controlled. The battle over the lake had only just begun, and soon, Clearwater Estates would learn that when you pick a fight with the wrong rancher, you risk losing more than just an argument. Buying the gate, Jacob Miller wasn't a man who rushed into things. Life on the ranch had taught him patience with crops, with weather, with livestock. But when it came to Karen Whitfield and her outrageous claim over his lake, patience was no longer enough. She had escalated the fight by calling the police, humiliating him publicly, and daring to advertise his land as if it were her own. Jacob knew if he fought her head-on, it would be endless. Karen thrived on confrontation. She would twist words, bully neighbors, and drag him through meetings or court battles for years. The only way to end this was to change the playing field entirely. That's when he discovered the listing. It was quiet, buried in county records rather than advertised openly. Karen's family had been struggling financially, too much money sunk into her perfect house, HOA vanity projects, and personal debts. Her husband, exhausted from her constant battles, had quietly listed their property for sale. It wasn't a foreclosure, not yet, but it was priced to move fast. At first, Jacob thought it was simply ironic, the queen of the HOA, forced to sell her lot to keep afloat. But then he noticed the map. The lot wasn't just another house in the subdivision, it was the very one sitting at the mouth of Clearwater Estates. The neighborhood's single road in and out ran across that property. Whoever owned it didn't just own a house. They controlled access. The more Jacob studied it, the more the plan crystallized. Karen had tried to sell his lake without permission. What if he bought her lot out from under her and controlled something even more valuable? The idea wasn't about revenge, it was about leverage. He didn't want to harm the residents. Most of them were innocent in this feud. But if he owned the gateway to the subdivision, he could ensure Karen never had the upper hand again. No more false claims. No more cops showing up at his ranch. No more HOA overreach. So he moved swiftly. He contacted the realtor, confirmed the asking price, and put down an offer cash. The realtor, stunned by the speed, accepted almost immediately. Karen hadn't even realized her husband's quiet listing had drawn a buyer. Within weeks, the paperwork cleared, the deed was recorded, and the deal was done. Jacob Miller, the rancher the HOA had tried to fence out, now owned the very land their president had once ruled from. And with that land came the road. The day he took possession, Jacob didn't make a scene. He didn't wave the deed in Karen's face or call a neighborhood meeting. He simply had a new gate installed, sturdy iron, wide enough for traffic, locked, with a key and code. Notices were placed at the entrances of the subdivision. Access was now managed by the new property owner. The reaction was immediate. Residents panicked at first, worried they were trapped or that Jacob would cut them off entirely. Karen stormed from house to house, screaming that it was illegal, that he couldn't possibly enforce it, that she would handle him like she had before. But when the county officials checked, they confirmed the truth. The road ran through private property, the property Jacob now owned. His rights were indisputable. To the residents' surprise, Jacob didn't abuse that power. He provided each homeowner with a code for the gate, ensuring they had normal access. Deliveries were allowed in, guests could enter with approval, and day-to-day life continued. But for the HOA, things had changed permanently. Their control had evaporated. Karen, once untouchable, found herself powerless. She couldn't host meetings without acknowledging Jacob's gate. She couldn't enforce rules without considering the man who now owned the path. Her entire subdivision depended on, and most humiliating of all, she had to request her own code for access to the community she once ruled. At first, she tried to fight. She called emergency HOA meetings, rallied residents, and even contacted lawyers. But every attempt failed. The purchase was legal. The deed was ironclad. The HOA, built on petty rules and power plays, had never considered something as simple as the road being in private hands. Neighbors began to grumble not at Jacob, but at Karen. Her obsession with Jacob's lake had backfired spectacularly, costing them stability and putting their entire community at the mercy of the man she had tried to humiliate. And while Jacob didn't rub it in, the reality was clear. The HOA had called the cops on him. They had tried to sell what wasn't theirs. And now the tables had turned. Karen wasn't just losing her grip on power. She was losing everything. The backlashed new gate quickly became the talk of Clearwater Estates. At first, residents treated it as a novelty, curious about punching in the code or handing out access to delivery drivers. But the novelty soon wore off, replaced by unease. It wasn't the gate itself that worried them, it was what it represented. For the first time, the HOA wasn't in control. For years, Karen Whitfield had ruled the community with an iron fist, fining people for paint colors, barking at teenagers for skateboarding on the sidewalks, and dictating everything from lawn length to mailbox height. Her authority had always been absolute, reinforced by the board and the fear of penalties. But now, with a single property transaction, her empire had cracked. The whispers began quietly. Some neighbors asked how Karen had let this happen. Others pointed out that it was her own husband's financial missteps and her obsession with appearances that had forced their lot onto the market, and the fact that she hadn't even known the land was sold until Jacob had installed the gate was the ultimate humiliation. At the next HOA meeting, tensions boiled over. Residents gathered in the clubhouse, expecting Karen to provide answers. Instead, she launched into a tirade, insisting Jacob's purchase was illegitimate and that the HOA would sue him into submission. But when pressed for evidence, she faltered. The deed was public record. The county had already confirmed Jacob's rights, and her bluster, once intimidating, now rang hollow. One resident after another demanded to know how she planned to fix the situation. Another asked bluntly why she had been so fixated on Jacob's lake in the first place. The question struck deep, unraveling the narrative Karen had spun for years, that she was protecting property values, that her control was for the good of the community. Now, her obsession looked reckless, even destructive. By the time the meeting ended, Karen's authority was hanging by a thread. The board members, once loyal allies, avoided her gaze. Neighbors who used to nod respectfully at her presence now muttered openly about recalls and votes of no confidence. The woman who had strutted through the subdivision as its queen was now fighting to keep her crown. Meanwhile, Jacob stayed quiet. He didn't attend the meetings, didn't argue with residents, and didn't defend himself in public. Instead, he focused on his ranch. He kept the gate well maintained, ensured the codes worked, and even upgraded the system to allow residents to manage temporary guest passes from their phones. The convenience surprised them. Slowly, the tension toward him faded. In contrast, Karen only grew louder. She patrolled the streets with clipboards, documenting supposed violations, handing out fines that many now refused to pay. She called emergency meetings no one attended. She even went door to door, demanding residents support her fight against the rancher. Each attempt only deepened her isolation. The more desperate she became, the more cracks appeared in her carefully crafted persona. At one point, she stood outside the gate for nearly an hour, shouting into her phone about conspiracies and corruption. While neighbors recorded her from their porches, the video made its way online, earning her the nickname Gatekeeper Karen. Privately, some residents began reaching out to Jacob. They wanted to know if he had any plans for the road, if he intended to charge fees or restrict access. He reassured them simply, as long as they respected his land, they had nothing to worry about. The reassurance spread quickly. Soon, whispers that once accused him of selfishness turned into quiet gratitude. And that shift was fatal. For Karen, the woman who had built her entire identity on controlling others now found herself powerless. The rancher she had tried to humiliate had become the steady presence the neighborhood began to trust, and with each passing day, her grip slipped further. Karen wasn't ready to give up, though. If anything, her desperation only made her more dangerous. She began hinting at lawsuits, contacting county officials, and even attempting to rally outside groups to her cause. But every call went the same way: the road was private. the purchase legal, and the HOA powerless. Still, Karen refused to see the truth. In her mind, she hadn't lost yet. She just needed one more push, one more angle, one more scheme to take back control. But what she didn't realize was that the residents of Clearwater Estates had already made their decision, and the person they once feared had become the one they quietly hoped would finally put her in her place. Desperate moves. Karen Whitfield had built her reputation on fear. For years, she had counted on intimidation and persistence to win every battle. Most neighbors, worn down by her relentless demands, had simply given in rather than fight. But now, for the first time, her tactics weren't working. The gate stood as a constant reminder of her failure. Every time she punched in the code, every time she saw the iron bars swing open under someone else's authority, it gnawed at her. This wasn't just about property lines anymore, it was about pride. She couldn't stomach the idea that Jacob Miller, the man she had tried to embarrass, had outplayed her so completely. And so, she escalated. Her first move was legal threats. She hired an attorney paid for with HOA funds, of course to challenge Jacob's ownership of the road. But the lawyer quickly discovered there was no case. The deed was crystal clear, and the county had certified it. After one wasted retainer, the lawyer quietly withdrew, leaving Karen scrambling for another excuse to keep the residents behind her. Next, she turned to manipulation. She distributed flyers claiming Jacob planned to start charging tolls at the gate. She whispered rumors that he was negotiating with developers to build on the land. She even suggested he might shut down access entirely unless the HOA bought him out. But her lies crumbled under scrutiny. Residents spoke to Jacob directly, and his calm reassurances destroyed her fear-mongering. The harder she pushed, the more the community resisted. Residents stopped paying fines. They skipped meetings. Some even posted signs in their yards mocking her leadership, calling for her resignation. What had once been whispers of discontent had grown into open defiance. Still, Karen wasn't finished. If she couldn't win through rules or rumors, she would try force. Late one evening, long after most residents had gone inside, she crept to the gate with a set of tools. Her plan was crude but desperate: dismantle it piece by piece, prove it was nothing more than an obstacle she could tear down. She imagined the glory of walking into the next HOA meeting and declaring victory, the iron bars reduced to scrap at her feet. But reality hit harder as she struggled with bolts and chains. A neighbor spotted her in the act. Porch lights flicked on. Phones came out. Within minutes, half the street was watching their HOA president, armed with a wrench, attempting to vandalize property she didn't own. Some shouted at her to stop, others laughed, recording every second. And then Jacob arrived. He didn't yell, he didn't threaten. He simply stood with folded arms, watching as the woman who had once summoned police to his ranch now stood exposed. In the glow of smartphone cameras, the neighbors' voices carried louder than his ever could. They demanded to know what she was doing, why she was dragging them deeper into chaos, why she couldn't just accept defeat. Karen's mask cracked. She screamed about injustice, about her community, about how Jacob had stolen everything from her. But no one believed it anymore. To the residents, she wasn't a leader fighting for their homes, she was a liability dragging them all into humiliation. Before long, law enforcement arrived. This time, Karen couldn't hide behind her title or her paperwork. She was caught red-handed, damaging property she no longer had any claim to. The officers, tired of her antics, treated it for what it was: vandalism. Neighbors watched in stunned silence as their once feared president was led away in handcuffs. The woman who had dictated their lives for so long, who had fined them for lawn clippings and holiday decorations, was now being driven off in the back of a police car. The moment marked a turning point. The HOA board, already fractured, crumbled completely. By the end of the week, most members resigned, unwilling to face the fury of the community any longer. Fines went unpaid. Meetings were canceled, and the HOA's grip dissolved almost overnight. For Jacob, the chaos wasn't something he celebrated. He hadn't set out to destroy the HOA, he only wanted peace on his ranch and protection for his lake. But in the end, Karen's obsession had destroyed the very system she claimed to protect. And as the subdivision tried to regroup, the residents found themselves asking the same question. If the HOA was gone, who would lead them now? Jacob already knew the answer. He wasn't going to lead them. He didn't need to. The gate said enough that the fall of Karen Rest sent shockwaves through Clearwater Estates. For years, Karen Whitfield had been untouchable. She was the president, the enforcer, the one neighbor everyone hated, but no one dared to defy. Yet there she was, caught on video, hauled away in handcuffs like any common vandal. The footage spread fast, first on neighborhood group chats, then on local social media pages. Residents shared clips with captions ranging from disbelief to outright mockery. Within days, the woman who once demanded respect was a running joke. Her rants at the gate immortalized for all to see. The title gatekeeper Karen stuck like glue. The HOA board tried damage control, insisting Karen's arrest was a misunderstanding. But no one believed it. Attendance at meetings plummeted. Fines went unpaid. Homeowners began openly ignoring the very rules they once obeyed out of fear. Lawn ornaments sprouted like mushrooms. Driveways filled with boats and campers. For the first time, Clearwater Estates looked like a neighborhood free from tyranny. Karen, meanwhile, faced the one thing she had never known before: silence. Neighbors no longer returned her calls. Board members distanced themselves, resigning in waves until the HOA was little more than a title without function. Even her own family grew weary of her obsession. Her husband, embarrassed and drained by her crusades, quietly moved out. Her children stopped visiting. She had built her entire identity around control. And now, with no one left to command, she unraveled. She tried to stage a comeback. After posting bail, she marched into the next community meeting, demanding reinstatement and calling Jacob a thief, a manipulator, a criminal. But the room no longer feared her. They didn't shout her down, they simply walked out, leaving her to rage in an empty hall. Jacob, on the other hand, remained steady. He never gloated, never rubbed her downfall in. He kept to his ranch, maintained the gate, and ensured access for residents remained smooth. The more he stayed out of drama, the more the community respected him. Where Karen had ruled with fear, Jacob had earned quiet trust. Eventually, the county weighed in. The vandalism charges stuck, and Karen was fined heavily. Combined with her mounting debts, it forced her to sell her house. The irony was not lost on anyone. The woman who had tried to claim Jacob's lake and control his ranch now couldn't even keep her own home. When the moving trucks arrived, neighbors watched from their porches, some relieved, others shaking their heads at how far she had fallen. By the end of that month, Karen was gone. Her name became little more than a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happened when power turned to obsession. The HOA dissolved formally soon after. Without leadership, without funds, and without the will of the people, it simply ceased to exist. Clearwater Estates transitioned into an independent neighborhood, each homeowner free to make their own choices without fear of fines or citations. For the first time in years, they felt like a community again, bound not by rules, but by shared relief. And at the center of it all was the rancher. Jacob never asked to be their leader, but his steady presence made him one all the same. Residents stopped calling him the problem and started calling him the reason. They were finally free. The battle had started with Karen trying to sell his lake. It ended with her losing everything, and Jacob standing quietly as the undisputed power in the area, not by force, but by patience, by resolve, and by the simple fact that he owned the ground under their feet. Karen had fallen, and with her, the illusion of HOA control had fallen too. The last gate life, after Karen settled into something no one in Clearwater Estates thought possible. Without the HOA breathing down their necks, residents discovered a freedom they had almost forgotten. Gardens grew wilder and brighter. Kids played in the street without worry of noise complaints. Neighbors talked to each other again, not out of obligation, but out of genuine friendship. And in the middle of it all stood the gate, strong, unyielding. It was both a boundary and a reminder of the storm they had all weathered. The residents knew that their access depended on Jacob Miller, yet no one resented it. In fact, they trusted him more than they had ever trusted the HOA. He had never abused his authority, never demanded payment, never held the gate over their heads. He had simply ensured it stayed secure and fair. Jacob returned to his ranching life, tending cattle, maintaining his land, and enjoying his lake in peace. But he also found himself woven into the fabric of the community in ways he hadn't expected. Neighbors came to him for advice. Children visited the ranch to see the animals. Families invited him to barbecues and neighborhood gatherings. Slowly, without trying, he became a figure of quiet leadership, the man who had shown them all that one person could stand up against the system and win. Karen, meanwhile, became little more than a whisper of the past. Stories about her circulated like folklore, exaggerated with each retelling. Some said she tried to start over in another town, only to find no one willing to follow her brand of control. Others claimed she spent her days trying to claw back the influence she had lost, but never succeeded. Whatever the truth, her reign at Clearwater Estates was finished years later. When newcomers moved into the neighborhood, they would hear about the gate before they heard about anything else. They learned the story of the rancher who outsmarted an HOA, and the woman who lost everything in her quest for power. And as they drove through that same iron gate, they understood immediately this was not a place where fear ruled anymore. The lake remained Jacob's, and he treated it with the same care he always had. Residents who respected the land were welcome to enjoy it, while those who tried to exploit it found themselves politely but firmly turned away. No one questioned his right anymore. The battles had been fought, the lines had been drawn, and the outcome was undeniable. In the end, it wasn't revenge that defined Jacob's victory, it was balance. He had protected his home, his family's legacy, and his peace, all without lowering himself to the level of those who sought to control him. The community had learned from his example, and together, they built something stronger than any HOA could enforce: mutual respect. The story of Clearwater Estates wasn't just a tale of a man against an HOA. It was a story about power, about obsession, and about the strength of standing your ground when others try to push you off it. And as the sun set over the ranch, casting golden light across the lake and the iron gate at its entrance, one truth remained clear. Karen had tried to fence him in. Instead, Jacob had bought the land beneath her feet, and with the only gate key in his pocket, he would never be locked out again.